Jacopo, buongiorno. How are you?
Bonjour, bonjour à tous.
Bonjour à tous. Jacopo, je vais faire votre introduction en anglais. On avait donc cette conférence de 45 minutes sera en anglais. Les questions-réponses vous seront traduites. Je sais que vous parlez très bien français, mais nous traduirons les échanges si c'est nécessaire, mais je crois qu'il n'y aura aucun problème. Je vais vous présenter pour les personnes qui ne vous connaîtraient pas, n'auraient pas lu l'information précédemment transmise lors des posts, et notamment les posts LinkedIn sur la page IA Pau. Jacopo, you're a research lead at reciTAL AI, a software editor. You're also a research affiliate at Datapop Alliance. Previously, you work for the fintech sector, consider bank, but you're as a senior data scientist, and you were a postdoctoral researcher at Leipzig, Sorbonne Université, and at the Mobile and Social Computing Lab for the Fondazione Bruno Kessler, Trento, Italy. From Trento, in Italy, to Belfast, Pisa, Amsterdam universities and research labs in Stanford and the MIT, your work ranged from modeling the behavior of humans when interacting with technology to modeling behavioral dynamics in small groups. From understanding the relationship between personality and social network structure as derived from call detail records to the analysis of virality dynamics in online social networking sites. So your latest works focus on natural language generation. We talked about NLP, so processing before, so maybe we'll talk about the difference with you. And today you want to make a focus on sovereignty of language models. Jacopo, the floor is yours. And people, you have the right to ask Jacopo everything you need from his presentation. Jacopo.
Thank you. I'm going to try to share my screen first thing.
I think it's gonna work. We have it's processing.
Yeah, I see it's doing something.
Yeah.
The wonders of technology.
Yeah, it works. So in few seconds, we'll have your screen. Yeah, it works for me.
Okay, so thanks a lot for the introduction, and thanks for the invitation as well, which was a nice occasion for me to actually think and put together this presentation, because this is a topic that I think we all have in the back of our minds. We all kind of think about it. On the other hand, you know, it's not what I usually give a talk about. It's usually about some paper that I make, some conference presentation, which is, so it was a nice occasion also to kind of clarify my mind about it. And as a disclaimer, I think I'm going to change my mind a lot of times in the coming months about this. So this is basically a screenshot of what I think about the topic right now. And but I think it's important to discuss. So that's why I'm very happy to give this talk here with you. So as you said, I'm the research lead for reciTAL AI. That's a company like 5 years old. I'll start with a little presentation of the company I work for. Because we started as a bunch of friends who met at the research lab, so we've been focused a lot on research on NLP. We have produced a lot of paper for our size. We are like 20 people, and now we have focused on a specific product which we sell to a number of clients, and we have several thousands of daily users on our platform. And I took a slide from one of our sales, which explains basically what our latest product does, which is processing complex documents. So it doesn't matter if they're long documents, structured, unstructured. We use deep models which are able to extract the information that you might like. We use multimodality, we use multilingual solution, But the reason why I put this slide here was not to sell you our product or our startup. It's actually because there is a sentence in the end. This is a natural sales slides, and I think that relates a lot to sovereignty. You can see that we describe our product as a full API SaaS service. There is a phrase there, hébergé en France. So this is something that rings important and to prospects and to clients, and at least in Europe and in France. And you will see these in a lot of sales slides from companies around us, from startups to even bigger ones. This links to one factor, which is territoriality, which is we want to have, when we buy a service, right now we want to have some sort of guarantees of where our data is and who treats it and what are our rights about it. And this is a very important aspect, since, as we all know, these kind of models that we use today, they are not just code, they are code plus data plus a lot of compute. This focus on territoriality is very important, and luckily in Europe, I think we had some sort of we were on time, we were on spot, and the thing that sovereignty represents, and actually the loss of sovereignty, is actually what we did when we decided as a continent, to get together and to lose a bit of our sovereignty as a specific countries, and try to have a sort of agreement on the important topics, and a sort of harmonization of the way we function together and the way we can exchange services and products, and also ensure that rights, basic rights, human rights are defended, and the right to control the data, the right to be aware of the pros and the cons of the technologies that we use every day now, is a very important right. And I don't think we would have got to this point if we didn't have a united European Union, which has a lot of faults, but on some things I think there is no way out. This is one of the examples, probably the best one. I think we all know about this regulation, which came like now 5 years ago, the General Data Protection Regulation, which puts some specific and clear limits to what can be done, and what are the rights of each one of us on the data that we produce every day. Of course, this doesn't mean that this is a perfect situation. In fact, those kind of regulations go in conflict sometimes with regulation from other states. For instance, the United States has a Cloud Act, and I'm not a lawyer, so I have no idea how one would solve this, but I think that's, they require basically that any company that's American is obliged to provide the data even of European people who live in France, and that is stored in France. So I have no idea how they will solve these kind of conflicts, but this is one of the underlying reasons for which we like to be sovereign, in the sense that we have, for instance, a French entity that controls the data of another French entity, builds AI models for their problem, and there's guarantees that the interference from external actors is somewhat limited. So the other big pillar, I think, if you want to talk about sovereignty, is the fact that we need a lot of investment in education and awareness about these technologies. And that's something that was actually recognized pretty early as well from the European Commission working group. So like in 2018, I think there was already a lot of discussion about this. And in one of the documents, it was agreed to invest significant amounts of money every year in order to actually achieve this sort of result, which is completely important, because if we don't know how things work around us, we at scale, meaning every one of us, not only people who do this as a job, it's going to be complicated to reach the levels of freedom which we wish to have. And if we talk about independence, we can't prescind from high performance computing, especially when we talk about these large models which require a large number of GPUs or clusters in order to actually train in a reasonable amount of time. Here I put what is a very nice effort from the French government and the CNRS, and it's called GenC. It's the French supercomputer. We have used this for research, and I know that right now there is a great initiative from led and coordinated by Hugging Face to actually build. I think there's going to be some talk about it in the roundtable afterwards, with the big science workshop. The idea to train a very in the open, a large language model, multilingual fashion. So this is possible due to these public investments in supercomputers. Otherwise, the means and the infrastructure needed to do this kind of work is going to be under the sovereignty of a few actors, mostly private. Actually, all of them are private. And so here I just put some of them. There is plenty more, and maybe there are some which we don't know about. So this is the American side of things. There's Google, there's Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, the big ones, OpenAI, who is kind of in between public profit and non-profit. So it's not very clear to me. I didn't really go into details. But here, I mean, these guys are sovereign, and these guys don't care at all about territoriality. They have no boundaries. They have no geographical boundaries. They have to adhere to a bunch of laws. If I could say something here, I would say that Google and NVIDIA are the most sovereign, probably because they control the hardware that is commonly used to train this kind of model. Of course, there is also the Asian part of things. So Baidu, Alibaba, Huawei, Naver, they all do great work, Tencent, and at scale. And so I'm not really clear on what it means to be sovereign and to actually use this word in this context. When we think especially that the market capitalization of the 7 largest US and Chinese firms together are twice the gross domestic product of Germany. So ultimately, I would like that we focus on what we actually care about. So that is fairness, there is safety, transparency, basically the alignment with human values for the AI system that we deploy in the wild, or that we wish to deploy in the wild. So the way I see sovereignty is, as a means to an end. It's what we can use in order to achieve these kind of goals. Because potentially the development and deployment of AI at scale is under the control of those companies, which we saw. But on the other hand, for instance, in the case of the EU, we can definitely regulate the applications and the effects that come to the final users. So, of course, I mean, to have all points of view, I also asked a large language model what it thinks about sovereignty. So this is actually what GPT-J 6 billion thinks about it. I just picked 3 examples of generation. So what it says is that one of the most debated issues is the so-called AI safety, and the question whether we can develop intelligent systems that will be capable of living for hundreds of years and doing so safely. On the other hand, it thinks that in the context of artificial intelligence, sovereignty means that the computer's intelligence should not be influenced by humans and be solely driven by what is good for it, and that humans should not take it upon themselves to steer a cognitive system. And it makes its point saying that sovereignty indicates that every AI can interact with others autonomously without involving an intermediary, such as a scientist or a programmer. So I would have to disagree with that, as I think all of us. But this opens the question of how do we ensure safety and robustness in the context of AI, since it is and it will become part of our daily lives, just like mobile phones do. I mean, AI runs on our mobile phones right now. It's just a question of the effects of the capabilities of the upcoming generation of AI systems and the effects that it will have on us. So I thought about a parallel with the software world. So we can think about the model architectures as classes in object-oriented programming lingo, and the object and the instances would be models and data. And the reason why I do this parallel is that, of course, we have been living with software for the better part of the last few, I don't know, half a century maybe. And of course, there has been a lot of work into ensuring that safety critical software is actually safe. So a lot of work in order to have dependable software. So this is a very important topic. How do we move from robust and safe to use software, like for instance the software that drives a plane, to dependable AI? I found this nice report dating back to 1989, which I found it interesting because the definition of AI was much different than what it is now. I mean, that's like 40 years ago. But it was nice to see that, at NASA, there was somebody at least writing about those kind of issues. And there is right now a lot of work in the deep learning community in order to explain how these models that we use work. Because if we can't explain the decision process that leads to some output or to some effect, it's going to be difficult to assure that to ensure that that the system is safe to use for different definitions of safe. So we could not provide guarantees on the system performance, for instance. And the reason why this is challenging is that software verification relies on properties such as mathematical stability, and on the other hand, this might not be applicable to the current AI system. And for instance, we can't really stress the system on all the possible inputs that a model might receive. This brings us to the correlated question, which is, what are we going to do when we know that there is significant upsides and significant downsides? So it's the two sides of the same coin when it comes to the potential of AI deployment at scale. So we could think about great things like optimizing energy management, predicting the consumption of energy, or improving healthcare, so that we can personalize treatment for each patient, or to analyze satellite images and understand better some environmental phenomena. There is also a lot of cons, because the same exact tools can be just used for manipulation, for exploitation, and in short, anything that we can predict, we can manipulate. And it can lead to losses of freedom. And this made me think about some work that I did in collaboration with colleagues back in 2015, I think, where we were coming from the mobile data, the big data. It was the big data moment. So it was about what can we do with, if we had access, if we are a telco and we have access to all this kind of information about people mobility, like at 5 minute scale and a 5 meter scale. What can we do with it, especially when we put it in relation with a lot of other sources of data? So there we thought about, okay, we can make this positive if we achieve 3 pillars. So user-centric data ownership and management. That's something that's arguably taken care about under the context of GDPR. Algorithmic transparency and accountability, not sure yet. And we were thinking about living labs so that we could experiment with data-driven policies at different scales before actually going wild. So this is something that I think has a parallel with the way some of these models, like from OpenAI in particular, have been not released, in the sense that it's very controlled who can have access to it and how. I think I'm running a bit long, so I'm going to speed it up. This is one example, one recent example, where a biotech company used the same system they use in order to detect toxic drugs. They used it to synthesize toxic drug. They published an interesting paper on natural machine intelligence. So I know this has to be about NLP, so I'll briefly go through it right now. We all know how this all started, and it was when it was proven that transfer learning could be extremely useful in NLP. Transfer learning was known for a few years already in the computer vision community. What happened with BERT, for instance, let's say 2018 is our starting point here. What happened with BERT there was that we had access to English-only checkpoints, and with limited data in other languages, there were limited multilingual capabilities. But there something happened, and that was very interesting. A very diverse research community created a lot of different interconnected synergies that allowed, for instance, and I'm being very self-promoting and very sovereign here by focusing on French works that, for instance, produce data, and 2 of those data sets are from my group, for question answering, for summarization, for pre-training language models. There has been work in the US. They have recognized at Stanford and put together a large amount of experts from very different backgrounds in order to try to understand exactly what we're going to do with those kind of what they call foundation models, which we can see as the large pre-trained language models which we use, and in order to actually understand better their inner working and their effects. So this slide comes from their very report, and it's interesting because we talk about sovereignty, but we don't deal with with anything but a small percentage of the languages in the world. So one thing that is very important is that we need to enable low resource languages to exploit these technologies. Otherwise, those are left there to die. Luckily, there is a lot of interest. Well, not luckily. I mean, it's part of the open science process. We have companies like Google, working on zero-shot machine translation and adding to Google Translates a lot of new languages. And we have, all these companies that publish in the wild. They publish a lot of code, not all of it, but it's quite open. We have efforts like, Masakan NLP. It's like a grassroots community of people that have other jobs, and they get together in order to advance NLP in Africa community. We have Territorialité AI, which started as let's replicate GPT-2, GPT-3. Actually, the model that I used before was trained on their data set. We have small companies like us providing a data set. We have small companies getting big, like Hugging Face, entering these big ambitious projects like Big Science. We have Mozilla working on speech, trying to collect a lot of samples on different languages. And of course we have, I couldn't fit here, of course, the logos of all the universities. I just put CNRS. Here we have the Public Research Institute. That all these people we gather on, we publish our preprints on archive in the open, we publish our code on GitHub, and we meet in person or not in person at several conferences, the major ones, I put them there. And there's so many interconnection that make possible to advance in the right direction. A lot of discussion has been happening in the NLP community lately, and this has produced a number of things. Like every time we publish a paper now, we actually go through reproducibility checklists. We have to write, in some cases we're obliged to write down some broader impact and ethical consideration section. There is structured ways to describe models and data sets. And these are all things that have not been forced upon us. We forced it upon ourselves. And honestly, I thought it was the first time I had to do this. I thought, yeah, what a waste of time. It's not going to work. Now, 2 years later, I understand I was wrong. And I think it's very important because this forces us to think about the impact of what we do and to keep the ethical considerations high in our mind. And this applies to everyone in this very broad community. So in the end, I think I'm right on time now. My bias take, subject to change, is that if anything, we should use the opportunity of living in the EU and having some sort of serenity on what can be the rules that apply to a rather big market for those kind of AI products. We really should think about regulating the applications. So put down a series of rules in order to defend our own rights. But we should not do that on research. We should actually foster open research and especially public research. And the way to move forward is that we need to actually make sure that this kind of cross contamination between big private labs, small private labs, big universities, small universities, different grassroots efforts, this kind of intermingling should probably get better, because that's, I think, what guarantees our own checks and balances when it comes to ethical considerations and making sure that we use these kind of technologies for good. So 9:45, I think I was on time.
Thank you so much, Jacopo, for this insight, this information. First point about what you just said about it's better to regulate application, not research. First question from IA Pau member. What about hardware, the hardware area? Because do you know, for example, if Google, NVIDIA, how they ensure their supply chain, hardware, application, and then the mix with research and maybe new stuff? But what about the hardware? Do you think they are really autonomous from this point of view?
Well, I do think that NVIDIA and Google, in that sense, they are to some extent autonomous. I mean, actually, we depend on them. There is actually no competitor to NVIDIA or TPUs in practice. In practice, yeah, they control the hardware and they develop the hardware and they do great work. And you know, it's important that it goes on. But sure, it's not under the public control. I mean, or even the supercomputers that we might use from national states, and you know, those are built with NVIDIA GPUs. And I think there is an example, the last language model that was published by Google, Pathways. I think in the paper they mention, if I'm not wrong, I think they mention in the paper that they trained it on special hardware which is not even commercially available right now. So there is, you know, advancements in terms of hardware that these guys who develop the hardware have access to, as it's natural. So I don't know exactly what we can do about that because probably it's too late.
Open questions, open answer. Another question, but related with what you talked about, big fishes, big companies, and you talked about open research. If we want to have the, let's say, to leveling, like research, let's say private research, open research, and research made by companies for themselves, what are the levels? Are they using the open research and having like an upgrade within their companies, or do we have like a mix of everything, or is it like really private sector versus open and public research?
No, as I said, I don't think there is a dichotomy there. I think it's basically the same kind of people with, okay, different goals, different political ideas or anything, but as researchers, I have the amount of collaboration that happens in between, you know, large groups, small groups. I mean, everybody, I mean, you're basically just an email message away from, I don't know, the most important researcher you might want to ask a question to. And
yeah, thanks to LinkedIn, it's possible. Yeah, it's like.
Well, even I think it's more likely to get an answer to direct emails.
Just find it on Google. Yeah.
Yeah, or a coffee break away. I mean, it's. I think the research community is made by people who, you know, make their professional choices as to where to work and which company to work for, but you know, the incentives are to publish in the open and, of course, you know, advancing science in collaboration with other researchers, like-minded researchers, and of course, yeah, the companies that employ you have to get some advantage to that, but it's that's the easiest part.
And what is your point of view if we talked about this global village of researchers and big companies and small companies, startups? How is it possible to stop or maybe just slow down the brain drain from public sector, public research, the French one, the European ones, like aiming to go to California, maybe to China now, or to other countries?
Yeah, I think it's this issue of the brain drain. I think it can be not an issue. It can be a feature in the sense that, you know, it's something that allows you to have basically insiders everywhere. You know, the interest, the incentive for a specific people, for a specific researcher in this case, is not fixed. So it changes depending on where he is. The problem I see is that it starts from considering the university or public research lab as companies. So that's what I think we should not do, especially in the age of kind of, you know, widely available, luckily, education. So anybody can get into NLP in maybe 6 months and be an expert. And you know, the role of public research centers is also to, play a part into these checks and balances, and have a strong presence. So the moment that all the researchers leave the universities to private companies, because mostly of money, because people need salaries and decent ways to live, then at that point, if the quality of public research goes down, that can be a problem. So I understand that you can't say, okay, AI is cool now, so AI researchers in the public gets a different treatment than, I don't know, social science researchers. In 20 years, it's going to be the other way around. Social science researchers will be much more in demand than AI researchers. So I think it's a global problem, and we have to make sure that the public research centers have the means to retain their talent, and to also make sure that these exchange with the private companies is incentivized and everybody wins in the end.
Jacopo, 7 to 8 minutes left. A few questions. One very direct. Those hybrid models mixing data and rules will offer more sovereignty in future. You talked about it. You talked about like autonomous AI and less autonomous with rules. So is it like the future, you think, of sovereignty? Will can apply it, these kind of rules you were talking about?
I think we shouldn't focus on sovereignty. We should focus on fairness and on robustness. And yes, there are these kind of approaches that depend always in the ability that we have to explain the dynamics that are at play in those kind of complex models that we talk about.
A second question, like it's a bit more tricky. It's about your company. Did you have a debate within your company, reciTAL, about whether to open source your AI tool? How would you define the conditions to be or not to be open source?
Yes, we had these debates, this kind of debates a lot of time. What we ended up doing is a sort of trade-off. Which means we publish a lot of the research we do. I think we published like maybe 20 papers in very good conferences in the last few years. We have 3 PhDs, CIF PhDs with public universities, and we publish data. Now, when it comes to the product, we didn't open source that because we need to sell it right now. But yes, that's a debate we have had multiple times. And
so is it more like, let's say the point, the topic that's the centric one is more the money, or is more the impact of this code for the community? So maybe the use of what you're doing, let's say black and white hat, like the bad use of your technology, or it's more about we're a company, we just need to leave. It's like, let's have a startup life.
Oh no, luckily I think, the current products that we have very limited bad uses, because one feature that is highly requested is that we need models to be very reliable in terms of their outputs, and so it's very specific use cases, which I don't think can be easily subverted and turned around. On the other hand, not making everything open source is also a questionable strategy, but it's probably the easiest one. I mean, it's a tough discussion, but in the end, you need to pay the bills. You need to pay the people to keep doing research. So the way we contribute to research is through papers and data, and we have released a bunch of models as well. But yes, the ones that are in production, that are private, those are also, I don't think we can even open source that or even think about it in some cases, because some of those are custom for specific clients. So that means they have been fed some data, which should not go anywhere else than on the client's premises. So there is
and we have
this kind of self-sovereignty.
And it's the point. And a lot of questions are about the risk and the benefits of using this kind of technology. One is related to your technology. I'm interested in the attempt to define a software or a system based on AI and machine learning models, as opposed to other kinds of algorithm used since decades in business intelligence, BI. So are these AI tasks inducing some risks for the users when the software output is used for decision-making or predictive tasks, for instance?
Yes, definitely. And that's exactly where I think regulatory interventions should apply. So I think in one of the latest drafts of the proposal for regulations from the EU Commission, it was explicitly mentioned that some application will be outright forbidden, like facial recognition or credit scoring, I think. And I don't think that's a bad move. I mean, the balance between what can possibly go wrong and the benefit is not exactly on the same level in those specific
and
cases.
We have this kind of subject with the autonomous cars. It's the same. The risk exists, how we handle it and how we regulate.
Yeah, I think there we are on the other end of the spectrum, because I think all the data by now basically tells us that an autonomous car is safer than me driving. That's for sure. By the way, it's a fact. But statistically, over everybody, it's also. I think there were a bunch of reports lately that I think there was an order of magnitude between the accident caused by humans at the drive or by machines. There the problem is probably.
Statistics will always give the answer.
Yes, the answer you want.
Yeah, exactly. Last question, but it's an important one because we'll talk about European communities, European membership. What about the fact that we always talked about the GAFA, we always talked about the big fishes, they are not European. There are few European unicorns based on AI, using AI or having the force. You were talking about efforts, but you were talking also about power, about money, about amount that are just huge amount of money that these companies, the GAFAM, can use to develop softwares and new solutions. What about the fact that in Europe it's maybe more than in the past, but it's not enough?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I put the relevant slide because if you think about it, there is no single European company. All these companies, they have a presence in Europe. They have, there is a lot of European researchers that work in the labs of these companies, which are based in Europe as well. But the companies themselves, they don't come from Europe. They're US or Asian. Do we miss that? To some extent, yes. But right now, in the current conjuncture, I think that might be even an advantage, because we might actually be able to use our sovereignty to make rules that apply to each of those companies. And probably at the European level, the process would be much more biased if we had a single, big fish from Europe in order to make this happen. So probably right now, it might even be a good thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course, we hope to get plenty of European.
Yeah, and it will take time and funding, so funds from European or companies or let's say institutions. But let's see what happens in the next months. Thank you so much, Jacopo, for sharing this moment with our association IA Pau for this event. It was a great speech. a lot of information, a lot of data that our community on LinkedIn, on our platform, just received. Really, thank you very much. Retour au français. Merci encore, Jacopo. À très bientôt. Je voulais profiter de la transition entre nos deux conférenciers pour remercier nos partenaires. On ne peut pas, vous avez entendu tout à l'heure notre président Nicolas Girardin parler des relations avec évidemment Luminae et Léoparc. On ne peut pas faire d'événements sans bénévoles, mais on ne peut pas faire d'événements non plus sans partenaires. Je voulais remercier Capgemini, la communauté d'agglomération Pau Béarn-Pyrénées, API Conseil, le Crédit Agricole, CY Tech, Euralis, évidemment la région Nouvelle-Aquitaine, la Fibre 64, Green AI, Systonic, Terega et l'UPPA. Sans ces partenaires, il n'y a pas de possibilité pour nous d'avoir les moyens que nous avons aujourd'hui de diffuser en live, de vous diffuser de l'information avec des conférenciers de la qualité que vous avez déjà pu goûter avec Jacopo et que nous allons continuer finalement à vivre en ce moment avec Patrick Salez.